We find it easier to do when they are pureed in the recipe. So let me find another way to have this conversation. And I think of Peter Drucker, who says communication is not saying something, communication is being heard. So in preparation for tonight, I watched the PBS series Makers, Women Who Make America, in search of inspiration for how the women in the 1960s were forced to reshape stereotypes. And they really were trying to reshape relationships between men and women in the most fundamental ways. Well, those were the days. So I watched it through the lens of advancing women in business, only to see how Phyllis organized women conservatives to shift the equal rights agenda's focus to non-business issues like reproductive rights. You got to give Senator Pat Schroeder credit, who brought her sense of humor when asked how she could be a mother and a congresswoman. And she answered, I have brains, I have a uterus, and they both work. So fast forward 50 plus years and think about the age we're living in. It's one of unprecedented opportunity, where the more you know about yourself, the more you can be successful. The boardroom is undergoing a big modernizing challenge for business. And in the words of Ice-T, don't hate the player, hate the game. So here's my playbook for a board seat. I look to know my strengths. I look to have some clarity on where I belong, know where I should contribute, and I try to spend time with people in the game. So yes, we have much work to do to see women on corporate boards. Tonight we'll look at some of the options that we can look in presenting to ourselves and closing that gap. So let me share more Peter Drucker wisdom that I think is helpful in looking for opportunities. The most important thing in communication is hearing what isn't being said. With that, let me introduce Catherine Blair, our event sponsor and partner at KNLA.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And thank you to Broad Circles for this opportunity to co-sponsor the Broad Circle 4th Annual Women on Corporate Boards. We're very honored to be a part of this event. I'm Catherine Blair, I'm a partner at K&L Gates, and I'm a lawyer. But I'm a good kind of lawyer because I help companies get money. I also advise corporate boards, both private and public, and their management and committees as well. So who is K&L Gates? K&L Gates is a large firm. We're international with about 2,000 attorneys and 46 offices over 5 continents. We represent leading global corporations, growth and middle market companies, capital market participants, entrepreneurs, anybody under the sun, and their dog, in all different types of industries and public sectors. We provide legal counseling on anything you can think of: employment and labor, real estate, litigation, corporate capital raising, anything else you can think of. In 23, K&L Gates was recognized as Law Firm of the Year by the M&A Magazine 2012 M&A Mid-Market Awards, and Corporate Board Member Magazine ranked K&L Gates as one of the top 25 law firms in the 2012 list of America's best corporate law firms. Thank you again for this sponsorship, and we're very much looking forward to this panel.
Thank you. So I have the pleasure of introducing Maura Conlin from Financial Profiles, who's going to give us an overview about the really very important world of investor relations. And for those of you who haven't been exposed to it, let's get Maura out here and help us. Thank you.
So, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining me and for the opportunity to speak with you all. I got a little nervous when Faye explained here tonight that luck favors the prepared. My comments are partly about investor relations, but they're really geared towards activist investing, which is an important part of investor relations, and something that we're going to be working on at each table later tonight with a case study, okay? So it's in that context that I'm going to address this fine field of investor relations. All right, so later on, we are going to sit around tables and we're going to be reviewing a case study about a fictional company called Falcon Energy and Production, which, like so many companies, was completely unprepared for an activist attack. So I wanted to take a few minutes now to put shareholder activism into context before we get started on that. So high-profile activist campaigns attract a lot of media attention today. I'm sure that you've all been, watching the news and the computer screen with all this stuff about Carl Icahn and Herbalife, Apple. I mean, there's just so much going on right now. But I guess I'd like to know, in the audience here, how many of you have had first-hand personal experience working on an activist campaign? Okay, that's kind of what I thought. So this should be an interesting session tonight, and hopefully you won't find my thoughts that remedial if you haven't been kind of first-hand involved. So basically how it all starts is with public companies communicating with their shareholders, and that really falls right in my wheelhouse of investor relations. My firm works with publicly traded companies, management teams, and boards on a range of specialized issues, including this activist issue. So when an activist investor launches a campaign against a company, there's a full cast of players on the stage. The people that are usually involved include the investor relations team, the management team, the board, in-house counsel, out-house counsel, as I like to call them sometimes, Catherine, no offense, and the activist investors themselves, and if it gets to the point of a proxy fight, many other people tend to get involved. So activist investing has been around for a long time, but with today's instant media at their disposal, these investors get a lot of attention and they get it pretty quickly. And they certainly have a first mover advantage today if they're going after a company that is both underperforming and out of touch with its shareholders, which you'll see is very much part of the case study tonight. So basically, when you think about the scenario, here's how it goes. An investor, and usually one that has built up a pretty sizable position in a company's stock, usually 5% or more, is dissatisfied with the company's results and thinks that for the benefit of this crowd, definitely she has a better solution to unlock shareholder value. Okay, just as in today's case study, the first approach to management and the board might be a softball letter filled with hardball facts about how the company is losing competitive traction, should spin off an underperforming asset, give the money back to the shareholders, all kinds of other things that I'll talk about in a minute. The company under attack usually counters with something like, so, thank you very much for your observations. We'll take that under consideration and get back to you shortly, Mr. Investor. Of course, we're dedicated to our shareholders. Thanks. And then that's usually the point when most companies start to mount their defense. It's at the point when they believe that an investor really has the ability, the resources, and the grip to launch an activist campaign. Meanwhile, what most companies don't understand is that the activist investor has probably for many months been plotting a course of action and certainly had some, good ideas about whether or not they could win before they approached the company, whether there was value to be unlocked, and whether they had enough support from other investors to actually fight if they needed to. And really what underlies all of these campaigns is this desire to influence the company to drive better, faster returns than an investor thinks that they're going to get by watching the company sit there and do what they've been doing for so long or what they're expected to do. So they go about it in a bunch of different ways. Some of them ask the company, we think you should sell your company outright. We think you should spin off this underperforming chemical division. We think that you should just give the cash back to the shareholders. You got way too much cash on the balance sheet, just dividend it back to us. The management team's terrible. Maybe you should house them. Maybe you should house some of these board people. I have better board people that I'd like to see, on the board that could make some value happen here more quickly. And then there's some that, ask for the removal of poison pills and other defense pills, so there are other defense measures so that they can put their own people on the board and get what they want. So as you can see, there's lots of different ways that people attack, these activist investors attack these companies, different things that they're looking for. Some of these cases are very high profile, like the ones that I mentioned, and there's well-known firms like Relational Investors, Third Point, Starboard. You read about them in the paper and you know it's the real deal. Okay, and then there are lower profile activists who you probably don't hear much about in the news at all. I mean, I've worked with people, with names like Bob Chapman and, everyday guys, investors that have their own personal portfolio that launch these campaigns. The other thing that companies don't know is that sometimes it's not these high-profile activists or hedge funds that are launching these campaigns. Sometimes It's your classic long-term buy and hold investor who you actually think is your friend and you meet with them 3 times a year, who's sick of waiting for a return and who may have heard from an activist guy that had a plan and said, yeah, that's a pretty good plan. I should have thought about that if I'm running this portfolio. So they come in all shapes and forms, and another important thing is that no company is too small to encounter an activist investor. I mean, the ones that you read about in the news, you know, they're in the news for good reason because they're high-profile cases, but there are many, many small cap companies that deal with this issue constantly. And you know, in lots of cases in the lower part of the market, it's investors coming after companies because they have too much cash and nothing to do with it, or they feel like they should merge with another company that has a complementary, you know, technology set, whatever. So then I looked at some stats in this fine publication that can keep you up at night called Activist Insight. And the subscription is available to any of you. And basically, it said that activists invested $12 billion in targeting companies last year, as diverse as Yahoo, Canadian Pacific, Adobe, P&G. And this speaks a little bit to the boards. It's noteworthy that of the 135 high-profile activist campaigns in 2012, 58 were seeking board representation. And according to this activist insight, that was the #1 agitator, if you will, was that activists going after this. They don't know what their value creation strategy is. The street's been swamped forever. You can read any analyst report and they say, God, here's 58 ways this company can create value. And the company keeps saying, well, we didn't have a good strategy, so we've just been hunkering down. We don't want to go out and meet with our investors, and it's no wonder that they get in this trap. So I think in terms of just things to think about, for life and as you read through this case study tonight, some of the ways that you can keep yourself out of jail on this activist thing. First, I would say that you need to practice an engaged form of investor relations. And that's really about consistently and clearly articulating your company's business and value creation strategies. And you need to consider investor sentiment in that process. You can't just create your company messages in a vacuum in the way that you see it. You need to think about how other people see it and how your investors see things. The second thing there is building strong relationships with your institutional holders. You need to meet with institutional holders face to face and in good times and bad. So many companies, when things aren't going good, they say we don't want to meet with them, and it causes a lot of trouble. You end up in a spot with no good relationships, and the investors are like, actually, when the going gets tough, I do need to see you. Second, you need to listen carefully and respond thoughtfully in all the interaction with investors, and you'll see that's a little bit of an issue in the case study tonight. Third, you need to keep track of who owns your stock. So we usually advise clients that have any potential activist situation to get surveillance and frankly, to be just on the lookout. When people call, if you know you're vulnerable, make sure you've got a list of activist investors and you're sort of on top of who you're talking to. It's getting harder and harder in the age of dark pools and electronic trading to know your investors, so the ones you can know, you should make an effort to. Fourth is just the idea of monitoring analyst research reports. The analysts are pretty vocal about what they want to see from companies from a value creation perspective, and there are so many great ideas in there that if companies paid attention, they might pick up ahead of time. And the other thing is you can't just pick up on it. You got to think about the strategic changes that are getting recommended and have some sort of response to them. Incorporating the ideas into the rest of your communications. For example, if everybody says you should be doing a buyback because your stock's trading below NAD, you need to have some kind of answer about why you have better growth opportunities investing in something else besides your stock. And as a company, you should take that on head on.
So it's time to get started for our fabulous panel discussion. How was the roundtable? Was it fun? I hope you have fun at your tables. I'd like to call up our wonderful panel of panelists. SEGIL, Catherine Blair. Who are we missing? BRONNER. Thank you. BRONNER. discuss this case with this absolutely clueless board. But our panel here are corporate board directors and an attorney who are not clueless, and they will shed light on the issues presented in this case and many more topics as well. And so I'd like to introduce you to our wonderful panel, Robin ABRAMS. Robin is on the board of several companies, including HCL Technologies, Unwired Planet. Robin came down from the Bay Area for this event, so we want to give her a huge thank you for that. Beth BRONNER. Beth is Managing Director at Mistral Equity Partners. Beth has served on the board of various companies, including Jambo Juice, right? And she actually came in from New York, so we want to thank her for that. Thank you very much. Our two local ladies who we are very fortunate to have are LARRAINE SEGIL. Lauren is on a corporate board director for a publicly traded company, Frontier Communications. She's very active with NACD, and she's also CEO of the Little Farm Company, which is the company that Larry has. Isn't that correct? No, that's the other company. But, okay. Catherine Blair, partner at K&L Gates, and Catherine introduced herself earlier. So let's give a clap for our two local ladies. Well, and I'm going to moderate, so I'm actually going to go ahead and sit down, and we're going to start by talking about the case, a real, those mics. Okay. Well, maybe I'll stand so that we can share this with us. Great, so the case, well, this board, Falcon, you all have your questions at your table, so I know you will know the answers, but I thought we could get just a little bit of a viewpoint from our panel. So Robin, what was wrong with this case? What went wrong at this board level? What, did that mean the independent director totally, was she on the ball or not?
So I don't think the board was on the ball. I think that the board was on the ball. I think they had an opportunity to understand when the shares were shifting. I think they had an opportunity to understand when the goals the former CEO left. I think that the audit chair probably didn't watch risks. They probably just weren't listening to their constituents.
Right, yes. You can all comment.
Okay. I think that everything Robin said is absolutely true. The difference between a charismatic CEO, who was the CEO before, who developed relationships, so it wasn't just a matter of communication. She was somebody who went out there, she had a lot of guts and gumption, so they looked at her as a sort of fellow wildcatter. You know, she had charisma, and so therefore she made an effort not just to communicate, but to actually develop relationships. And I think that that's where the current CEO, who might have done everything right from a management standpoint, didn't realize the charisma factor. And I think that that was, it's not written down in a rule book anywhere. You can talk about doing communications, but the charisma factor is part of the relationship development, which is more than just informing people about what's going on. It's really trying to connect with them.
Catherine?
I agree with these assessments that the board was definitely asleep. I question whether they even knew the company's stock symbol. They didn't pay attention to anything. They probably got so comfortable with the previous CEO who had this charisma and could run the company and did so well that when it transitioned to the current CEO, they just weren't thinking through, they weren't asking why. And I think that one of the big things that that board could have done is also think about CEO succession and the traits that made that previous CEO successful and what they could have looked for in the current CEO. And I think that's when things started to flounder.
So I would echo everything that's been said, but at our table, came up with the conclusion that there was enough land to go around for everyone, and that it was hard to single just about anyone out, but there were some stellar ones that we could. I feel really pretty strongly that the lead director had a role. It wasn't only on her, but she had a role, and she accepted that role. She accepted it, and she got a paycheck that went along with being the lead director, and therefore had a responsibility to figure out what her job was. And really fell short, along with several other areas, including, and nobody's brought up the IR department, but the CEO, the buck stopped with the CEO, but what was that IR department doing? Because they were issuing reports that even the board members thought were lacking, but they weren't engaged enough to even point that out. So, like we said, there were lots of ways we could point this out, it just wasn't working.
Yeah, so let's have a couple of questions. Now, you have a situation where there's so many things wrong, and you are on a board, but you are not the lead director, right? How are you supposed to know what's going on? Your CEO isn't telling you, maybe the lead director isn't, you see what I'm saying? How are you supposed to behave in that situation? What is your role?
So there are a zillion touch points. So first of all, as ordinary director, you're entitled to ask any question. If you sit on the audit committee, you've got a couple different opportunities to report and look at IR. You do risk analysis at least once a quarter, so you can put this on risk. Many boards today are doing annual self-assessment of each committee and the board. So you've got another opportunity there. There is usually a written assessment of the CEO, so you've got an opportunity there to influence that. I've probably forgotten some.
Not really, actually. I think about more. But I think that, part of what the board is doing is receiving presentations from management. And if it's good management, they will be rotating the senior leadership team through the boardroom. So you shouldn't just be hearing from one person. It's not as if just the CEO and the CFO are the only voices of the company. You should be hearing from sales and manufacturing and IT, and if you're not hearing from them, there's something seriously wrong. So your CEO should be presenting the senior leadership team and their various issues to you, and you should be asking questions. And if you're not happy with the answer, then it is your responsibility to dig in a little further. And of course, you have outside auditors who are also giving you their opinion. And if you don't like what's going on, there are opportunities to bring in other consultants who can also give you some insight. So there are a lot of opportunities, rather than basically cover them all, but there are many opportunities just on the ongoing agenda of the board meeting that will give you a sense that something's not 100%. We're either only getting good news, but it's not all good news because our results are not actually terrific news. So it's dig a little further.
I would just say, I'm sorry.
No, be good.
I would just say that I haven't used an expression at the table that they came to the meetings like we're going to the movies. So yes, you have all those opportunities, and you certainly do, whether it be the self-assessment, which I think is required, whether it be the CEO performance review, whether it be asking questions, but you have to still be engaged enough to listen to the presentations, talk to the management. I'm sure they have their dinners before the board meeting, they have their lunch at the board meeting, they're not just sitting there with the CEO. They got to ask the questions, they can't just, enjoy the show. And it sounded like in this case, they were just enjoying the show.
They also have executive sessions, and in those executive sessions is when they need to raise, I'm not happy with what's going on. Is anybody else? Hopefully not everybody else will be happy. Maybe the small board will be, and there are boards like that, by the way, who basically are there for the feed, there for the camaraderie, and amazingly enough are not aware of the fact that they have fiduciary obligations.
Kathleen, did you have a comment?
I don't have anything to add. You guys know what you're doing.
I'd like to add two more things. Really good board members, in my experience, are able to be skeptical and yet collaborative. And part of the reason that all of you are here tonight is because we are interested in being a board member. And with apologies to the men that are in the room, I find that in many boards, women are very good about being able to say, in executive session, maybe in the public session, there's an elephant here in the room, right? Tell me how many legs does that elephant have? And yet not go down a rat hole, not be antagonistic about the questions. And so that is an attribute that I think that many women can play and actually bring some real value to many boardrooms.
So you find yourself, you're sitting on this board, and you find yourself in this situation. The lead independent director is on the phone with the lawyer. She says, "Oh my God, I hate those activists. What is going on here? What do you do?" So what do? You're in this situation. How do you navigate out of it? How do you play with the activists? Are you nice? Are you open? How are you going to proceed finding yourself in this situation?
Well, I've had 4 activist situations, right? And so I was sitting on a board one time where I was the only person, and there was an activist that wanted to have their own slate of candidates. And the board members around me actually wanted to go to the mattresses. And I did not, right? I did not for the reasons that Maura identified earlier in terms of expense and distraction. And this was a company that I just didn't feel could afford the distraction. And so then I offered to go with the CEO to meet with the activists, right? And it was very sensible. We brought a member from the activists onto the board. And if you can avoid a proxy battle and still live with yourself and still have the company performing, by all means, my opinion is do it, right? Do not engage. And listen, right? Many times, the activist has really good ideas once they get their nose under the tent.
Yeah, the other side of this might be that there's just a big ego fight going on. There has nothing to do with your company. And that's what's happening with Goodman. It's exactly what there are 2 activist investors who hate each other. And they fought before over public companies, and the one that lost is now back to the table to fight again. And so the company is almost incidental. It's sort of a vehicle for their ego battle that's happening in the public eye, and it's devastating for the company. We can really do nothing about it.
I have to say I've only had 1 activist opportunity, so I'm not as experienced. But it was someone who is a household name. And I would applaud the CEO in this case, who really, I think, took ownership and leadership with the board. So while I think it's important that the board have a sense of right and wrong in terms of dollars spent and fiduciary responsibility and how to handle it, it's really much easier if the CEO himself, a person in this case it was himself, gets it. And really work with the board to better understand why you don't want to be repressed, you don't want to make a big deal about this, you really do want to do your job, which is to protect shareholder value, meet with the appropriate people, pull your forces together, and in this particular case, gave up 2 board seats. And you know what? It strengthened the board. And I think that says a lot about how the CEO was really willing to listen and to lead his directors who were appalled, oh my God, when in essence, you know, he ate some crow and did some things, and he was willing to do it for the sake of shareholders.
Any legal issues involved in that?
Well, at the point where the board and the CEO are at odds in connection with an activist shareholder, you do have some real issues. And I would hope that at that point, you have maybe a lead independent director who has the foresight and how to bring the parties together. One legal issue is, yes, the board is a case study. Really wasn't where you don't feel like management is doing it. You certainly, because the company could be subject to even more liability, you have a board member who's going out and speaking basically for the company and meeting with an activist shareholder. However, I really like the idea of what you did, and that was something that our table had discussed. And I think it depends on the personalities of the company. And so if you have a situation where a board has to satisfy its fiduciary obligations and it's at odds with the CEO, and you're trying to deal with an activist shareholder, you need to have hopefully a board member who can go and be the eyes and the ears of the rest of the board members. You have somebody at management, you have somebody in investor relations, and you go and you meet with that activist shareholder. And hopefully you can make headway, and that board member comes back and make an executive session. Meet with the other board members and say, this is what I saw with my own eyes, this is what was discussed, and come up with resolution. Again, so you're not, although as a lawyer, we love proxy battles, we love making those filings, we love going through that stuff, but for the good of the company overall, you don't want to go through that.
What you just said about the board member going with the management and IR, et cetera, to the activist shareholders, I would applaud. But I would also say I've seen the right process, in my opinion, which is consistent outreach to shareholders, which is not just when you're in the soup, but on an ongoing basis. And I've really seen it done very, very successfully where if it's not the lead director, the non-exec chair, who I think are the two most appropriate, but from time to time, different board members being part and parcel with management, not on their own, but being part of an investor day or being part of a visit to key shareholders. And that's where they really know, they don't have to just take the word of a report, they really know what's going on. And I would think that's an important way to just keep things out of the soup.
Well, and as a company's lawyer, the only thing I would ask is that as long as these people are properly educated as to how they can deal with shareholders, and as long as that's done, and you have trust in the board members who go out and do that, and you don't become rogue or mavericks and start talking off the cuff, you're fine.
I would say that those companies that actually have those processes in place and have those strong IR teams and do the investor days on a regular basis, and whether it's, they do the analyst tours and take them to see your product on the supermarket shelf or whatever it is, they also, at least in my experience on boards, also have rather educated board members and strong enough CEOs that if the board member's not educated, they're not going to be invited along, which is appropriate as well.
I think there was one big problem many problems, but with Falcon, the CFO was basically the voice to the shareholder representatives, and that was something I can only imagine a CEO permitting that to be the only voice. So, I mean, even on earnings calls, how could that possibly happen? So there was obviously some dysfunction in that relationship, which perhaps wasn't well moved forward in the case study. But I don't know of any circumstance where a CFO would be doing all the earnings calls on his own or her own and doing all the dog and pony shows. I mean, very often a CFO will go with an investor relations person to do a financial presentation, but to absolutely not have the CEO visible is most unusual.
Well, I'd like to shift gears from the case to some bigger questions. We have a lot of women in the room who are interested in some of the issues related to diversity on the board. And, there's financial shareholder activism, like what we saw in this case. There are quote-unquote activists of a different nature that pursue social issues like diversity or other social parameters. Do you have any thoughts about activism as a way to get change? One point of change that obviously we're all interested in is obviously seeing more women on board. Is that a vehicle, or is this something that this goes into the question of mandates and quotas and everything like that as well?
So I think many people know that the quota system has worked well in Scandinavia, France. Malaysia has just implemented a quota system as well. It may be unpopular in this room, but I don't think that mandating quotas here through ISS, whether it's for a green cause or a diversity cause, a sustainability cause, I don't think it's going to be particularly effective here. I think that there are so few board seats that turn over every year that it is going to have to be a tough slog. And for those women in the room that are CPAs, for those that have headed up sales organizations, those are the skills that these boards need and are looking for. You just have to find the right people that are hiring. I think the other thing that we would do as well to understand is how many of the public companies actually use recruiters, because I think very few of them actually do. Maybe Fortune 500 do, but otherwise that's who you know is in the valuation networks.
I would agree. I don't know if there are any recruiters in the room, but I don't mean to offend you. I just think that recruiters like to do the easy job. The easy job is finding somebody who is a friend of somebody on the board, somebody who, unless they've been asked to diversify the board, they won't necessarily go for somebody who's a wild card. They'll go for a sitting CEO. So if you are a president, a CEO, or the head of a sales organization, you will be very well served to start putting your name out there to try and find a board position before you retire, or very, very soon after you retire. And if you come from the accounting professions, definitely court your clients, because when you actually move into retirement, you would probably be a good person to be on an audit or chair of an audit committee. So recruiters have, in my experience, not been the ones who would take a chance with a woman who has never sat on a board, has not been a CEO, and doesn't have audit committee experience. So networking is what it's all about.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Networking is it. I see how board members are appointed as well from the outside, and it's rare. Not every company is a Fortune 100 company. Basically, it's almost every company is like a middle market company, and they want to save their resources. And although they're looking for independent board members, they're out there through their own networks where you don't have to pay for somebody. Our people actually discussed this issue, and somebody came up with a great idea. Think about the industry that you would want to be a board member in and what skills you can bring to that, and seek programs and conferences and events for that industry. Because, and it may take time, people start making connections and meeting people, and really the important people to know are the other board members, people who know people on the board, and the CEO.
So I don't want to just repeat what was already said, but I will tell you I've been on 8 public company boards, and I got on one through a headhunter. And it's not just my example, but I think it's the example of what happens. And I said this at our table, and to me it's, again, all about networking. And the thing I was going to say, which is very similar to what you said, is assess your own skills. Assess your own skills and know what you have to bring to the party. And I can't remember where I heard this, but it was at one of these conferences where people were saying, gee, why do you want to be on the board? I think it was a group who was doing speed dating, and why do you want to be on the board? And somebody said to me, well, I want to be on the board because I think it's a good way to make money. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about is that you think you have some skills to bring to the party, whether it be your financial background. One of the hot topics now is digital marketing and social media. How do you get to the right people to network and make sure you feel good about what it is you're bringing to the party?
Well, I blogged about this, so some of you may have actually read it, but I'll say it again. I did the numbers on the Fortune 500, and there are about 5,000 board seats at those companies, approximate, right? So 2,500 of those should be occupied by women, right? But only 17% are occupied by women right now. In order for us to get to 2,500, that's 1,650 board seats that need to be occupied by women. As Robin said, about 300 seats become available every year, okay? About 50 of those go to women nowadays because boards are really trying to get women on the boards, right? So at that pace, my 9-year-old daughter will be 42 years old before she can say that board representation at Fortune 500 companies is 50-50. That's an interesting paradigm. So, but that's actually what it's going to take, unless there's some speeding up that happens in the interim. Any thoughts on that?
One of the hidden, I'll say, landmines is that I think that the European countries, the companies, are actually going to try and attract our pool of female talent sooner than we actually.
They're already doing it.
They're already doing it. They're already doing it. And so only then I think that may create a sense of competition, and maybe some of those boards will say, hang on a second, all right, maybe we should be looking here for some talent.
Okay. The next question is this. This kind of relates to the same issue. I just read a Stanford board survey, executive summary, which said that the board members surveyed felt that sitting CEOs, who are typically the people that, the type of women that boards like to put on boards, that get on boards, are sitting CEOs. But the Stanford study said, regardless of gender, sitting best candidates for serving on boards. That was the result of the survey, Stanford surveyed sitting board members. And the boards, more than 50% said that sitting CEOs may not be the best board candidates. Any thoughts on that?
I think there are specific functional expertise that boards need that a sitting CEO might not have. And I would also comment that I think that's particularly true in private companies. When I look at our portfolio companies, and we're a private equity firm that focuses only on consumer businesses. And one of the very hot topics in consumer businesses today is all about social media, digital marketing, reaching the consumer one-on-one. And one of the things I think that's very important, even in public company boards, especially in consumer businesses, is exactly that skill set. And many sitting CEOs today don't actually have an expertise in that skill set. And I use it as an example to say that if you dig into your skill set toolbox, you find you'll see what you can bring to a party. But I point that out for another reason. That it's not sometimes just
boards, and that's to learn about governance, learn about collaboration, learn how other boards handle difficult issues, conflict resolution, and so on. There are certain CEOs who will not have a comp committee without a sitting CEO on that comp committee, because they want somebody who has like mind and also understands where they're at and what they want and their needs and so on. So if it's not a sitting CEO, at least a former CEO, for many CEOs, is a requirement to have that person on their board and actually sitting on the comp committee. One of the biggest challenges for a sitting CEO is time. The time that a board position takes up is huge, and if you sit on audit or comp, it's even huger. So if you are a sitting CEO, you will have that constraint. For many public companies, they will not permit their CEOs to sit on one board because of the time constraint involved.
I have two comments. One, I was hired during the interview process for one board, and I was a sitting CEO at the time, and they were looking for someone that could have the Dutch uncle discussion with the CEO in terms of his perks. And so, are you tough-minded enough, if you're on the comp committee, to be the one to take those perks away, which is kind of interesting. So, I'd like to make a comment about this study. So, I can almost throw a stone at Stanford from where I live. I'm incredibly disappointed in that research because I think it misses the point. I think they had a wonderful opportunity to talk about what good governance is in a board, and there should be at least an annual process that says what skills does this board need going forward, right? If you look out 2 or 3 years, what kind of skills do we need? What kind of skills do we need? And then measure those skills up to the people that are sitting around the table, and then be upfront enough. If we have people that have aged out, and here I mean skills, not in terms of number of years on the planet, then they should rotate those out. They missed a tremendous opportunity. They made it a gender discussion, they made it a CEO discussion, and it ought not to have stopped there.